The last thing the Carter family expected on that December morning was trouble. At least not on this day. The sedan was filled with everything that made the holidays feel like home. The smell of cinnamon from Naomi's travel tin, a thermos of hot cocoa rolling under Lila's feet, and wreaths peeking out of the trunk for the family gathering later that night. Christmas music hummed softly from the speakers, warm and nostalgic, the kind that made even the busiest highways feel a little kinder. For once, the world seemed gentle. Traffic was light. The sky was clear. And Jonathan Carter, who rarely had a day off, had finally traded his usual tactical boots for polished dress shoes and a deep navy suit. His niece was getting married, and the whole family had been buzzing for weeks. "Daddy, look!" Jordan pointed out the window. A house along the roadside was covered in so many lights it practically glowed in daylight. "Who puts up decorations before lunch?" He laughed. "People who love Christmas," Jonathan chuckled back. Even 5-year-old Lila, bundled in her sparkly red dress, was humming along as she kicked her heels in the back seat. It should have been a perfect morning. But perfection has a way of snapping in half, quietly, then suddenly. The moment they turned off Route 59 onto the narrower, rural stretch of Highway 14, everything changed. Not because of anything they did. Not because of any mistake. But because of the flash of red and blue blinking sharply behind them. The car went silent. The music shut off mid-jingle. The holiday warmth evaporated. Naomi turned slowly toward her husband. You weren't speeding, right?" "No," he replied, but his voice had already tightened. Not with guilt, with recognition. He knew this road. He knew the reputation of the local precinct. And he knew the statistics, the ones every black parent in America carries like an unwelcome inheritance. "Maybe it's a mistake," Naomi offered. But even she didn't believe it. The cruiser's lights kept flashing. No siren, just the demand. The unspoken assumption. "Pull over." Jonathan eased the car to the shoulder, gravel crackling under the tires. "Kids," Naomi whispered, "keep your hands where you can see them." Jordan nodded, jaw tight. Lila froze, clutching her stuffed reindeer, her excitement from minutes ago swallowed whole. When the officer stepped out of the cruiser, Jonathan saw everything he needed to know before the man even opened his mouth. White, early 40s, muscles stiff, not from training but from attitude. Hand resting casually, too casually, on his belt. The walk of someone who felt bigger than the badge pinned to his chest. The kind of man who didn't see a family. Just targets. He didn't approach with holiday goodwill or the professional courtesy Jonathan had taught younger officers for decades. He approached like he wanted this stop to become something. He angled himself toward the driver window, jaw set, eyes narrowed as if the winter sun personally offended him. Naomi whispered, "Okay, kids, remember what we practiced." Imagine that, rehearsing safety protocols like lines in a play. Lila's little hand trembled as she raised it to the back of Jonathan's headrest, her curls shaking. "Mommy, why do we have to do this on Christmas week?" she asked softly. Naomi forced a smile that hurt to make. "So we stay safe, baby." Jonathan rested his hand on the steering wheel, open palm, clear view, the universal posture of a man who understood survival too well. Still, he kept his tone soft. "Everyone stay calm. No sudden moves." He wasn't speaking to the kids. He was speaking to the officer he hadn't met yet, but already knew. The officer reached the window, leaned down, and rapped his knuckles sharply against the glass. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a message. Jonathan rolled it down slowly. "Mornin', officer. Something I can." "License. Registration." The officer cut him off. No greeting. No explanation. No reason for the stop. The Christmas lights from the passing cars reflected in the officer's sunglasses, but they couldn't hide the disdain beneath them. His lips curled slightly, as if just looking inside their car annoyed him. Naomi cleared her throat gently. "Officer, can we know why we're being stopped?" The man turned his head just enough to glare at her. "Did I ask you anything, ma'am?" Jordan stiffened. Lila shrank back. Jonathan inhaled once, deeply, the way he always did before delivering difficult news to subordinates or writing up misconduct reports. Except today, He wasn't the one in control. My license is in my wallet, he said evenly. My registration is in the glove compartment. For safety, I want to inform. I don't need a speech, the officer snapped. Just do as you're told. Normally, Jonathan would have reached for the documents already. But today wasn't normal. Because the badge the officer was demanding, the one sitting quietly in the glove compartment, was not a regular badge. It wasn't even a detective's badge. It was the shield of the newly appointed Deputy Police Commissioner of the state of Maryland. And the man now barking orders at him was under internal review. A review Jonathan himself was scheduled to oversee. But right now, on a cold December morning, wearing a suit instead of his uniform, his family watching in fear, none of that mattered. All that mattered was keeping everyone alive long enough for the truth to surface. Officer, Jonathan began softly, out of the vehicle. Now. The man's hand drifted toward his holster again, not gripping but threatening. Cars passed. Drivers stared. People whispered. Phones angled out windows. A black family pulled over a few days before Christmas. It was almost a cliché. But for the Carters? This wasn't a headline. This wasn't a story. This wasn't a viral clip. This was their real life. And Jonathan could feel the moment tightening, like the air before a storm, like the seconds before a verdict, like Christmas joy being stolen right out of the sky. He exhaled slowly. He could defuse this. He had to. But the truth? This officer had already decided who they were. And he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The air outside the car felt colder now, sharper, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment the officer barked his last command. But inside the sedan? Inside, it felt like the Carters were suffocating. Jonathan kept his hands firmly on the wheel, palms stretched wide and open, fingers slightly spread. Every inch of him radiated calm, but Naomi could see the tension in his shoulders. A tension so familiar she could feel it in her own bones. The kind that came from years of surviving situations you shouldn't have to survive. The officer's voice ripped through the air again. I said step out. Jonathan didn't move yet. Officer, he said quietly, my children are in the back seat. I'm trying to make sure they don't panic. It was the truth. But it was also a warning. A request for humanity, but the officer didn't care. Don't make this harder on yourself, he snapped. Naomi placed a trembling hand on Jonathan's arm. Her whisper cracked. Just, please be careful. Jonathan nodded once, slowly. Not because he was afraid of what would happen to him, but because he knew what his children would witness if things went wrong. He turned toward the back seat. Kids, he said softly, close your eyes. Jordan didn't. He couldn't. He stared at the officer with a mixture of fear and fury boiling in his young chest. At 12, he had learned more about injustice than any child should. He had seen too many videos. He had memorized too many names. And now? He was watching the same story unfold in real time, starring his own father. Officer, Jonathan tried again, my wife is recording. That made the officer's eyes flash. Oh, I know she's recording, he hissed. That won't save you. Lila whimpered. That sound, that tiny, fragile sound, pierced Naomi deeper than any insult the officer had thrown so far. Naomi placed her phone on the dashboard, camera still rolling, but freed her hand to cradle Lila's head. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. But even Lila could tell it wasn't okay. Children always knew. Outside, gravel crunched under the officer's boots as he stepped back, widening his stance. Driver, I'm not going to tell you again. Get out of the vehicle now. Jonathan took a slow breath. He had conducted hundreds of traffic stop trainings in his career, written protocols, revised guidelines, insisted on de-escalation strategies, personally mentored dozens of officers. And yet standing here now, with a man who ignored every standard of professionalism, he knew exactly the type he was facing. An officer who used the badge as a weapon. A man who felt bigger when others felt smaller. The kind who escalated first and justified later. Jonathan lowered his voice so only Naomi could hear. If I step out, don't stop recording. Whatever happens, don't stop. Her eyes filled with tears as she held his arm. It'll be all right. I promise. He didn't promise lightly. He had never lied to her in 17 years of marriage. But today, that promise wasn't only to her. It was to himself, to his kids, to every family who never got to finish their drive. He slowly began to lift his right hand from the wheel. "Stop," the officer exploded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Jonathan froze mid-lift, fingers still hovering. Naomi gasped. Jordan clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. The officer stalked closer again, boots grinding the gravel like he wanted the sound to intimidate. "Are you deaf?" he barked. "I didn't tell you to move your hands." "You told me to step out," Jonathan said evenly. "I can't step out without." "I don't care." The officer leaned into the window again, face inches from Jonathan's. "You do exactly what I say when I say it. Understand?" Jonathan's jaw ticked once, but his voice stayed calm. "I understand." That calmness only seemed to enrage the officer further, like he wanted fear, not composure. "Good," the officer muttered. Finally listening. Naomi's heart hammered like a trapped bird. This wasn't law enforcement. This was intimidation, raw, personal, intentional. Then, without warning, "Now let me see your hands." Jonathan raised both hands again. Slow, deliberate, palms spread. "Outside the window," the officer snapped. Jonathan extended them out, fingers trembling slightly only because the cold air slapped against his skin. The officer nodded sharply. "Good. Now step out, keeping your hands visible at all times." Jonathan looked at his family one last time. A silent, loaded moment. The last moment before everything changed. He opened the door. The cold December wind swept through the car instantly, making Lila cry harder. Her little hands reached for her father, but Naomi wrapped her arms around her daughter tightly. "It's okay," she whispered again. But this time her voice cracked so badly she wasn't convincing anyone. Jonathan stepped out. He looked impossibly dignified, even under the cruelty of the moment. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp navy suit that glowed softly under the winter sun. The officer walked in a circle around him, inspecting him like a man inspecting a suspect, not a father on his way to a wedding. "Hands behind your head," he ordered. Jonathan obeyed. "Spread your feet." He obeyed again. Naomi started shaking. "Is he arresting him?" Jordan whispered, horror in his voice. "No," Naomi said, though she had no proof. "He's trying to scare him." But Jordan wasn't convinced. He could see the officer's grin, that twisted, triumphant expression of a man who enjoyed this. The officer stepped closer. Closer than necessary. "Funny how you people always dress up to look respectable," he murmured. "Like a suit can hide what you really are." Jonathan closed his eyes for the briefest second, not in shame, but in restraint. Naomi's breath caught. She'd heard that tone before. That venom. That prejudice disguised as authority. Jonathan opened his eyes again, calm, resolute. "Officer," he said quietly, "you're stepping out of line." The officer's head snapped up. "Oh really? And what are you going to do about it?" But before Jonathan could answer, before Naomi could breathe, before Jordan could blink, flashing lights appeared again. Another cruiser. Then another. The officer smirked. About time." But Jonathan? Jonathan stayed completely still, because he knew the silhouette stepping out of the second cruiser. A taller officer, older, calmer, decorated. Commander Raymond Holt, the man who'd sworn him in. Naomi recognized him too. Her eyes widened. "Jonathan," she whispered. The first officer didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his moment of power. But that moment was about to shatter. Because the commander saw Jonathan. And the commander froze. "Commissioner Carter?" he blurted. The officer's grin vanished. Naomi's heart leapt. Jordan's eyes widened. And Jonathan, still standing with his hands on his head, finally spoke. "Yes, Commander. And we need to talk about your officer." The officer stumbled back, color draining from his face as the realization hit him like a punch. He hadn't pulled over a random black family. He had humiliated, threatened, and nearly arrested the deputy police commissioner now overseeing misconduct investigations. And his career wasn't just in danger. It was over. Officer Grayson Wells stood frozen, his breath frosting in the cold December air. The color drained from his face so quickly it looked like someone had pulled a plug inside him. Naomi watched the realization travel across Wells's face inch by inch. First confusion, then disbelief, then fear, real fear, tightening around his throat like a rope. Commander Holt approached fast, boots crunching over gravel. "Commissioner Carter," he repeated, louder this time, as if saying it again would make the surreal moment settle into something real. What on earth is happening here?" Jonathan slowly lowered his hands from behind his head, the pose he never should have been forced into. His shoulders ached, but he moved with the same controlled calmness he had maintained through the entire encounter. "Commander," Jonathan said quietly, "I was attempting to comply with a traffic stop when your officer escalated without cause." Holt's eyes flicked to Wells. "You escalated?" he snapped. Wells opened his mouth but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, throat visibly tight. I didn't know who he was," Wells stammered. Naomi stepped out of the car then, phone still recording, but now standing tall, protective, fierce. Her voice sliced through the cold air. "You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them like a human being." A ripple went through the bystanders. Several had pulled over to record, others had slowed their cars to watch the unfolding drama. Commander Holt stiffened. "Ma'am, I assure you we'll get to the bottom of—" But Naomi wasn't finished. "This man screamed at my children. He threatened my husband. He refused to let him move safely. And he lied about a stolen vehicle just to justify his behavior." Holt's jaw tightened. "Is that true, Officer Wells?" Wells shook his head too fast. No, sir, I misinterpreted, I thought." Jonathan's calm voice cut through the scrambling excuses. "You thought what?" "That a black family on their way to a wedding was automatically suspicious." Wells's lips trembled. He looked around desperately, hoping someone would jump in, support him, validate his narrative. No one did. People were filming. Witnesses were murmuring. Kids in other cars were staring with wide, horrified eyes. And there was no version of this where Wells walked away untouched. Jonathan reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a small, silver badge case, the one the officer had forbidden him to retrieve earlier. He opened it. The badge caught the morning sun just enough to throw a sharp gleam across the officer's stunned face. "Deputy Police Commissioner," Holt confirmed aloud, face flushing with embarrassment and anger. "Wells, you pointed your weapon at him?" Wells panicked at the implication. "No, I didn't point it, I just—" "You rested your hand on your holster the moment you approached me," Jonathan interrupted. "My children saw it." Little Lila peeked from the back seat, cheeks wet with tears. "I thought he was gonna hurt Daddy," she whispered. Jordan put an arm around her, his lips still quivering. That sight, that small, painful moment, silenced everyone. Jonathan lowered himself to eye level with the kids. "You're safe," he murmured. "I promise. You're safe now." But even as he said it, Jonathan felt something breaking inside him, something years of service had already cracked, but never fully shattered. Because he knew the truth. He could protect hundreds of officers. He could reform policies. He could train units. But he could not protect his own children from the fear baked into their reality. Naomi watched Jonathan, her heart aching. She turned her camera toward Wells again. "Everything you did," she said, voice steady and cold, "is on camera. Your words, your threats, your lies, your treatment of our kids." Wells's face twitched. "Ma'am, please, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Naomi snapped. "You meant every word." Commander Holt stepped fully between Jonathan and Wells now, posture rigid. "Officer Wells," he said, voice low and firm, "you are to hand over your badge and your weapon." Wells blinked rapidly. "What?" "Commander, with respect, we don't need to." "Now," Holt ordered. Several bystanders gasped. Jordan sat up straighter in the back seat. Naomi inhaled sharply. Wells tried to laugh it off, a short, strangled sound. You're suspending me? For what?" A misunderstanding? Jonathan finally straightened, his gaze level and unblinking. You abused your authority. You escalated without cause. You threatened a family with children inside. You interfered with lawful documentation. You fabricated suspicion to justify your aggression. He took one step closer, not threatening but immovable. And you tried to intimidate a man you thought had no power. Wells swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed visibly. I didn't know you were. That's the problem, Jonathan said softly, painfully. You should treat every person as if they matter, not just the ones whose titles protect them. Wells looked around again, searching for support, validation, anything. But the crowd saw what happened. They heard the slurs between the lines. They watched the fear in the children's eyes. There was no coming back from that. A whisper rippled through the onlookers. He's done. Is that really the commissioner? Why'd that cop go after him? That poor family, that officer's career is gone. The weight of reality finally crashed down on Wells. His breathing hitched, and he looked physically smaller, like the uniform no longer fit him. He fumbled shakily with his holster, unclipped his gun, and handed it over to Holt with trembling fingers. His badge followed, surrendered like the last fragment of dignity slipping from his grasp. Holt signaled 2 other officers. Escort him to the station. Internal affairs will take over from here. Wells flinched. Commander, please, you can't, this was just. Go, Holt said sharply. As 2 officers approached, Wells stepped back. No, don't touch me. I'll walk by myself. But when he turned to walk to the cruiser, he made the mistake of locking eyes with Jordan, a 12-year-old boy who had watched every second of his cruelty. And at that moment, Wells didn't see defiance. He didn't see hatred. He didn't even see triumph. He saw disappointment. Deep, unfiltered, painful disappointment. The kind that burned worse than anger. Wells tore his eyes away and stumbled toward the cruiser. Naomi lowered her phone, tears finally spilling. But Jonathan wasn't relieved. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't vindicated. He was quiet. Commander Holt approached carefully. Commissioner Carter, I am so deeply sorry. If I'd known. That's the point, Jonathan murmured. You didn't need to know. The commander swallowed, shame settling heavy in his chest. Naomi stepped beside her husband, slipping her hand into his. What happens now? She asked softly. Jonathan looked toward the road, where holiday traffic moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He looked at his children, whose innocence had been chipped away just a little more. He looked at the cameras still recording, at the people whispering, at the officer now sitting in the back of a cruiser, his career dissolving minute by minute. And Jonathan exhaled. Now, he said, voice low but unwavering, we tell the truth. All of it. The drive to the precinct should have been quiet. Instead, it was thick with questions, the kind that settle into a child's mind and stay there for years. Jordan stared out the window, watching the police cruiser carrying Officer Wells shrink into the distance. Dad, he whispered, did he hate us before he even saw us? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He wanted to choose his words carefully, not because he needed to soften the truth, but because he needed to deliver it with the weight it deserved. Finally he said, he didn't hate you, son. He hated what he assumed you were. Jordan nodded slowly. But he didn't look comforted. Naomi squeezed his hand. Some people are taught to fear what they don't understand. But fear never justifies cruelty. Lila looked up, her voice tiny. Daddy? If he knew you were the boss, would he have been nicer? That one hurt. Jonathan swallowed hard. He should have been respectful no matter who I was. That was the truth. And it was a tragedy. By the time they reached the precinct, word had already spread. Not because a deputy police commissioner had been stopped. Not because the officer was being arrested. But because the truth, the raw, ugly, uncomfortable truth, had walked straight into the public eye. Naomi held Lila close as they stepped out of the car. Jordan stuck by his father's side, chin lifted, determined to be brave. Inside, Commander Holt met them immediately. Commissioner, he said quietly, Internal Affairs is already reviewing the footage. The officer is being held for questioning. Good, Jonathan replied. His voice was steady, but something inside him churned. He wasn't angry for himself. He was angry for his kids, for every kid who had to learn the rules of survival before the rules of childhood. Sir, Holt continued, the press is demanding a statement. You don't have to speak now. I do, Jonathan cut in gently. Holt blinked. Are you sure? This is still fresh. You're allowed to take time. I've been taking time, Jonathan murmured. For years. For families who never lived to give their statements. Holt's lips pressed together. Naomi placed her hand on her husband's arm. Do what you think is right. He nodded. And then he walked toward the podium. The room quieted the moment Jonathan approached the microphone. Not because he was a high-ranking official. Not because he was well-respected. But because of how he stood, solid, composed, still dressed in the navy suit he had put on for a wedding, not a scandal. A father first. A husband second. A leader only after that. He adjusted the microphone gently. My name is Jonathan Carter, he began. And earlier today, I had an encounter with one of our officers. Flashes exploded from cameras. He didn't flinch. My family was on the way to a wedding. My children were dressed for a celebration, not a confrontation. But a traffic stop became an ordeal that should never have happened. He paused, letting the silence settle. In the glove compartment of my car was my badge. I am the deputy police commissioner. The officer who stopped us did not know that. A murmur rippled through the room. Jonathan continued. He should not have needed to know. That line struck like lightning. Naomi, standing behind him, felt tears sting her eyes. Jordan stood taller. Lila held her stuffed reindeer to her chest. Jonathan's voice deepened. If I were not a commissioner, if I were simply another black father driving his children to a family event, then what happened today could have ended very differently. And that is the part we can no longer accept. One reporter called out, Commissioner Carter, what do you say to people who claim this was just a misunderstanding? Jonathan turned his gaze toward her softly. I say misunderstandings don't make children cry, he answered. Misunderstandings don't involve hands on holsters. Misunderstandings don't include fabricated accusations of stolen vehicles. Another reporter, do you believe this was racially motivated? Jonathan exhaled slowly. I believe the officer made assumptions before he saw me. Before he heard me. Before I could speak. And assumptions in policing can be deadly. Silence. Complete silence. Then Jonathan looked at the cameras with a final, unshakable calm. Effective immediately, Officer Grayson Wells has been placed on suspension pending a full investigation. The badge is a responsibility, not a license to intimidate. And the uniform does not make a man honorable. His actions do. He stepped back. And the room erupted. Naomi pulled Jonathan into her arms the moment they stepped away from the microphones. He let himself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since the lights appeared behind their car. You did good, she whispered. Jordan hugged him next, tightly, fiercely. I want to be brave like you. Jonathan closed his eyes, overwhelmed. You already are. Lila wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. Daddy? Can we still go to the wedding? He laughed softly, the first laugh in hours. Yes, he said. We can still go. But before they headed back to the car, a small crowd gathered around them, older black couples, younger white allies, neighbors who had seen everything online. One older man in a veteran's cap approached Jonathan with tears in his eyes. Sir, thank you, he said. For speaking out. For standing firm. For not letting this be swept under the rug. Jonathan shook his hand gently. I didn't speak just for me, he replied. I spoke for anyone who's ever feared what should have been a simple conversation. The veteran nodded, voice cracking. My grandson, he's 8. He saw the live stream. He asked me why the officer looked so angry before he said a word. I didn't know how to answer him. Jonathan rested a hand on the man's shoulder. We'll fix it, he said quietly. Not all at once, but step by step. As the Carters drove toward the wedding hall, snow began to fall, soft, light flakes drifting across the windshield. The world felt gentler again. Safe again. But something had changed in Jonathan. Something had awakened in Naomi. And something had taken root in Jordan and Lila. A lesson no parent ever wants to teach, yet must prepare their children for. Respect is earned. Authority must be accountable. And justice is not just a courtroom word, it's a lived experience. Jonathan looked at his children through the rearview mirror. "Remember this," he said softly. "A badge doesn't make someone right. Character does." This story wasn't just about a traffic stop. It wasn't even just about one frightened family or one officer who crossed the line. It's about something larger, the quiet truth so many Americans live with every day, that respect is not always given equally, that fear walks beside far too many families, and that justice only means something when it's applied the same way to everyone. So I want to hear from you, genuinely. If you were standing beside Jonathan that morning, what would you have done? Do you believe an officer who behaves this way should ever wear a badge again? And in your opinion, does our system need reform, or does it need rebuilding from the ground up? Your perspective matters. Your experience matters. And your voice, right here, helps push conversations like this into the light. If this story resonated with you, tap on the like button. It lets the platform know these stories matter. Subscribe if you want more real, human stories that challenge us to think, feel, and grow. And share this video with someone who believes these conversations are overdue. Because change has never come from silence, only from people brave enough to speak.